Welcome to the Be Bold podcast. I'm Beth Whitman. If you're new to this podcast, welcome. This is where I feature conversations with women who have inspirational stories to share. These women come from a wide range of backgrounds and find themselves in an equally wide range of stages in their lives. The one thread that I found is that they are bold in what they do. And as you'll hear in this next conversation, it's rare that they take no for an answer. I know that when I hear stories about other people's success and triumph over obstacles, I'm personally inspired. And really, it makes me feel like anything is possible. I believe we all have the ability to become better versions of ourselves, and what I'm hoping is that you'll find pearls of wisdom in these conversations, bits of information that inspire you and motivate you. I'm hoping you'll hear something that makes you want to change and make choices in your life that ultimately makes you happier and more fulfilled. I'm confident you'll enjoy what you hear, and I encourage you to subscribe to the podcast in iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play. If you heard my chat with Terry Warros of Molokai, that was episode number 3, you would have learned that Molokai is a pretty special place. It somehow manages to throw all the right people together and things just magically align there. I had numerous magical moments, but one of those was that I happened to be there the very day that Teresa Shook, the founder of the Women's March, and I'm talking the founder of the Worldwide Women's March, was there. Now, she was there visiting from Maui, where she lives, and she was there for just one day to speak at a small event at Terry Warros' bookstore. Though I had a very busy schedule myself, I did have a chance to pop in and meet Teresa and spend a little time at her event. We didn't have a chance to record just then, but as luck would have it, she was headed to the Seattle area where her son lives. So although we didn't get to speak in Hawaii, we were able to arrange a convenient time while she was on the mainland. I knew from just the little bit that I heard during her event on Molokai that this was going to be a special conversation. Teresa is an interesting woman on a lot of levels. I guess how could you not be as the founder of the Women's March, right? But as we dug into a bit of her history, the environment in which she grew up, and how she never seems to take no for an answer, you begin to understand how the Women's March could have grown so large. We, of course, talked a lot about the Women's March, including what motivated her to start the event, as well as the power of women showing up en masse. She talks about how she pushed back against some of the initial naysayers who at first told her it wasn't possible. Although she was on Facebook, she had to learn how to create an event really quickly in order to get the Women's March rolling, and she talks about how Facebook initially shut down the event on their platform because so many people signed up. We talked about her theory of how 53% of white women could have voted for the current president, and you'll want to hear about that because she says out loud something that I've somehow thought but couldn't quite put into words. Outside of the Women's March topic, we meandered into some other areas, including how she didn't accept a doctor's diagnosis that she was going to be blind in 6 weeks' time from a rare eye disease. She just refused to believe him, and she overcame it by sheer will and later through stem cell treatment. Though that was just a small segment of our conversation, that might have left the longest lasting impression on me. It's really pretty incredible. She also talks about how she gets motivated when someone tells her she can't do something, and really keeping her eyesight is just one of those examples. Prior to my speaking with Teresa, I asked listeners what they wanted to know, so she answers a variety of questions from what inspired her to start the march and to how that positive energy can be sustained. Here's my conversation with Maui resident, grandmother, retired lawyer, kick-ass woman, and Women's March founder, Teresa Shook. Teresa Shook, welcome to West Seattle. I know you've got a little bit of allergy going on here, I think from the Pacific Northwest, but we'll work through that, and you'll be great, I know. So you are here, you're visiting from Maui, is that right?
Yes, Hana, Maui.
Yeah, Hana, beautiful. And I bet a lot of our listeners have been to Hana before, and they do know how lovely it is. So we had some nice weather here in Seattle for you for a little bit, but now the now the rain's turned and you're ready to head home, aren't you?
I'm ready. Very soon, in a few days.
Okay, good. Good. Well, we'll miss you, but we'll come and visit. First, let's just talk about what are you doing here on the mainland?
Well, I have family here. I have a son, and then either by relationship or biology, I have 4 girls who call me Tutu.
And what's Tutu?
A grandmother.
Oh, lovely.
In Hawaiian. So I have two grown sons, but the other one doesn't have kids. So I come here more often than Austin, Texas, where my other son lives.
So you come here to see the grandkids?
Yes, because I have 4 girls who call me Tutu.
That's fabulous, yeah. So most people know you because of the Women's March.
Yes.
What are you working on right now? What we'll do in this conversation is we'll talk a little bit about what specifically you're working on right now. And I know that you were just on the East Coast doing some very special things there. And then we'll kind of backtrack a little bit and talk about what brought you to this point. So in terms of the Women's March, what are you working on right now?
Well, I just got back from New York, where I was invited by Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney to attend a luncheon where Nancy Pelosi was the keynote speaker. And I got to speak on behalf of Women's March as the founder. And my purpose there in speaking is just to remind people because there's so much coming at us right now that could feel negative, that does feel negative, that to remind people what it felt like that day that they stood up, that love, that solidarity, and that there's still hope, and there's always hope, and that that number of people, which was over 5 million in the world, is still that those people are still there. And so I'm wanting to keep that connection and those stories going.
So when you say there's so much coming at us right now that's negative, do you just mean, well, specifically, what do you mean? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
From the administration. Mm-hmm. And I think people feel bombarded by the news and the negative energy of the administration and the things that are being said, and just it feels out of control to a lot of people. They feel kind of hopeless. And I want to remind, and that was how they felt the day before the march got started. I mean, the planning of the march. And I just want to keep reminding them, wait, we're still over 5 million people that stood up that day and had hope, and the hope is still there.
How do you continue to remind people that there's hope? Because I am to a certain degree in that camp. And first, I'll back up and I'll tell you that fortunately or unfortunately, I was at the top of Mount Kilimanjaro when the Women's March happened. So I missed out on it, which was a sad thing for me to have missed out on, because I know how wonderful it was. And now I'm in a situation where I do feel bombarded, and I do see all the negativity, and I see the circus that we're surrounded by, or that we're in the middle of. My opinion, that it's a circus. I know some people out there might disagree with that. So how would you tell a person like me not to be dismayed, and to stand up and to continue to move forward and reach back to that positive day with the 5 million women, in the march? Well,
one thing is I don't watch the news. I get updates on what's happening in the news, but you can get in this loop where you're sitting and watching newscasts endlessly, and that will wear you down. So pick and choose your times to be informed. You can do that by finding it online in your own time. And if you feel like you have to watch the live news, then take breaks. Self-care. Do things besides being bombarded by that information that's coming at you. Then take action. So there's so many ways to take action: by making phone calls, writing, showing up at town halls, joining in with other nonprofits, grassroots organizations, selling something to raise money to give to those, or donating if you have a lot of money to give. Just start a huddle, or a NAG, which is a neighborhood action group, where you can get together and talk over these things, because just talking about it helps. And from talking, ideas happen. So, but just do something. Children some children have done art exhibits, and they've made art around the issues that are important to them, our environment, or whatever they think is important, women. And then they have a little art exhibit and they sell their art. And then they take the money and they give to where they want that money to go. And adults can do similar kinds of things. Teach your children about civics. Learn about civics yourself if you don't know how our government works. And the phone calls, I can't stress enough, the phone calls and the letter writing are making a difference. We're slowing down the agenda. So we've really slowed the progress of the administration down. They haven't been able to get really any big legislation passed. And so these phone calls and letter writing it's really making a difference. I can't tell you how much difference it's making. Showing up at town halls is making a difference.
So, from the outside, sometimes it just feels futile. But what you're saying is that really is helping.
It is.
Okay.
And what it's going to do is set us up to flip Congress in 2018. And that's the goal, because then we take back control. And so if we put pressure now by phone calls and letter writing on the people that we don't, even though we don't control the Congress, we don't control the administration to do what we think is in the best interest of fair, just, and inclusive America. By making phone calls, slowing them down, making them take energy away to deal with us, it slows down their agenda. It also brings attention to the elections that will be coming up in 2018. And so money is being poured in to run candidates against the people who are already seated in Congress now. So the goal is to flip Congress in 2018.
So I'm hearing two different things that we can do. And one is just to make ourselves feel better. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
There's just that because of that feeling of futility, or there's so much, where do we even start? Mm-hmm. There are things that we can do to kind of help ourselves feel better. And if we feel better, then we'll be more prone to action.
Yes.
And then that's the first part. And then the second part is actually taking the action and knowing that what we're doing is making a difference too.
Yes. And one other point, there's so many things, you can't cover it all. So pick the things that are important to you and then just target those. Don't try to be informed on every single issue or topic, because you can't be, because that's where you'll just feel bombarded. So pick, if climate is what you're passionate about, pick climate as your issue and go after that.
Right. So if it's equal rights,
if it's equal rights,
yeah.
If it's healthcare, ACA,
exactly.
That's another example. Whatever issue is like in your heart that you can stand up for, then just focus on that and let the rest of it go, because other people are dealing with those. We have 5 million people helping us.
Right. Yeah, that is a great point.
Yeah.
You said you were in New York and you were at this event and you had the opportunity to speak at that event. So you must have had a lot of support.
I did.
there.
And I got to say some of the things I'm just saying to you now, and very supportive. And I got to that event because I had met Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney at a forum the Common Good put on, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. And I was given which also occurred in Manhattan, and I was given the Spirit Award for Citizen Activism by that organization, along with John McCain and John Kerry. I met Congresswoman Maloney there, and then she invited me to come back for this luncheon.
Is that was a private event that won't be publicized or aired? That wasn't a public talk or anything that we might see? Mm-hmm.
The luncheon was a private event. There was a short little newscast regarding the Fearless Girl statue in New York City, having to do with keeping her in a museum. And I did speak, and it is on a clip somewhere it was on the news, but I think it's more local news in New York.
This is something that I just learned about a week ago, I think. That's the one where the Wall Street Bull is on one side,
yes,
and the Fearless Girl, and I think you've got her on your Facebook
yes,
page
I do.
too. Yeah, where sorry, I overran you on that, but I just got excited.
That's okay,
because someone had just mentioned this to me, that there was this big craziness that people wanted that taken down. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, and so they're fighting to keep it up.
And evidently the governor had allowed it to be there right where it is for a year, and the year is coming up. And so Congresswoman Maloney wants there to be a women's museum dedicated to more historical things. And she wants the Fearless Girl to be in the Women's Museum.
You're working on the Women's March still. That's your primary messaging right now. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, great. So let's go back a little bit. And I've read, and we met on Molokai not too long ago, when crazy, just coincidence that we were both there pretty much just on one day
right.
together. But we didn't have the time to record then. So thank you for coming today. You were speaking at that point, and so I learned a little bit about you then. But what I'd love to know, and I know some of this is well documented already, but what I would love to know, just kind of hear in your own voice, I know that you haven't been politically active previously, if I'm not mistaken. That's what I've read, that you weren't politically active. But kind of let's hear about the arc of your life. You were practicing law. Was that something that you had always wanted to do from an early age? Or
Never.
You didn't. So how did that come about?
Well, I got married really young, had 2 boys, and was trying to finish up my undergrad education. And
how old were you when you got married?
19. I wanted to be an English professor. So I have an undergrad degree in English literature education, so a double minor.
Was that on Hawaii or in Hawaii?
No, I grew up in a small town in Indiana, a really conservative small town in Greenfield, Indiana. Then when I got married, I ended up in Southern Illinois. And although I attended a couple other universities before that, Southern Illinois is kind of where I finished up because that's where I was living. Got my undergraduate degree, but slightly before I'm finishing, I realized I'm probably going to leave my husband. And I have the 2 young boys, and I thought, I don't think I'll make any money as an English professor because they were a dime a dozen then. And that really was my passion, but I felt like I needed to be able to take care of my family. And I had a guy in my English classes who was pre-law, and he would always be upset with me because I got A's in my classes and he got C's, and he would say, I need the A, you don't need the A because I'm going to law school. And it really was something silly like that. I thought, if that idiot can go to law school, I can go to law school.
Wow.
And I just applied and decided to go to law school.
That's a bold move right there, just to make that connection.
Yeah.
And also to be wise enough to say, look, if this divorce is imminent, I need to take care of my kids, and I probably can't do that on an English professor's salary, but what can I do? Yeah, that's a big deal.
And so then I applied, and I got accepted to some prestigious law schools, but at the time I still was with my husband, and then I accepted Southern Illinois University Law School because that's where I was living. And then I left my husband 2 weeks before law school started and packed up my 2 little boys, and we went to law school.
Was he supportive of you going to law school to begin with?
He was neutral on that. I don't think he voiced his true opinion. I think the kicker for us was that he wanted to live in this small little Southern Illinois town for the rest of his life, and I knew I didn't, and I didn't really want my sons raised there. And so I thought, might as well move out now. And although I didn't really realize what I was getting myself into to raise my sons as a single mom going to law school, but we did it. So
where did you go after Indiana?
So Southern Illinois University.
Illinois, I'm sorry.
That's all right. That's where I went to law school, and then I moved back to Indiana and practiced law there in Indianapolis for about 9 years, and then I moved to Santa Cruz, California, took the bar there, and practiced law there for another 10 years.
What brought you to California? That's a big move.
It was a big move.
Were the boys grown at that point? You brought them to California.
One was just grown. One was still in school. My sister had passed away, and she was just 30, and she had a virus, and it got in her heart. She had congestive heart failure, and only way she would have lived was to get a heart transplant. And I thought, life's too short. I want to be by the ocean. I'm going to go to California. And I had an aunt who lived in Santa Cruz, so that's why I picked Santa Cruz. So I took the bar exam there and practiced law there.
So you learned early on that life is short.
Yeah.
And you just got to take hold of it and make decisions.
Yeah.
It's been that.
And actually from the get-go, it came out that way, that you just have to live life to the maximum. You have to take opportunities and make opportunities. And
were your parents like that?
No, not at all.
What happened to you?
I'm not sure. They were conservative. My father was a bigot. He was misogynistic. I mean, I loved my father. He's passed now, but he was very old school. And my mom, very, very do what's proper, do what, she very much cared what other people thought. And me, not so much. And I always was for, we lived in this community of all white people. But I never understood like how you could treat people differently based on the color of their skin. So I don't also know where that came from. That just came from me from the get-go. I didn't understand it. And so I remember a funny little story that my mom, and I think my mom was more tolerant in that way. My father not. But my mother would have been embarrassed if you did anything publicly to demonstrate that. So like I remember she worked for Eli Lilly and Company, and there was going to be a PhD family moving in who was black. They would have been the first African American family to move into our community. And I remember she came home from work and she said, "Now don't you be the first person to go over there and make friends with them," because she knew I would. They never moved. They probably took one look at that town and said, "I don't think so."
Not for us.
Not for us.
Yeah.
But that's exactly what I would have done. I would have made them my friends because everyone else wouldn't have.
Do you have other siblings other than your
I
sister?
have another sister. We're not close.
Okay.
Yeah.
So is she anything like you?
Nothing.
Probably not if you're not close.
No, she's just like my family was. Very conservative and very do things by the book.
I'm fascinated that you're so different from the rest of your family and how that happens. I don't have the answer to that.
I don't know the answer.
Yeah. It's funny. I have three older brothers. One of them, and they're all lovely. And one of them we always thought was the black sheep of the family. Mm-hmm. And then one day I realized I was the black sheep of the family. I'm the one who left New Jersey, moved to Seattle by myself. I travel all over the place, but it's that same thing of like, yes. How did that happen? Where did that come from? You know, like the interests that I have are so different.
And I really do think maybe it's you come out that way. You have a tendency. Like I'm a risk taker, and I've also traveled all over the world and I've had a friend say to me, I did a tandem parasailing off a mountain in Banff. Just found this guy to take me up a beat up truck up a logging road, and I was with my friend and she was going to go, and then she got cold feet, so she didn't go. And she had this long conversation with me afterwards. I had a death wish. And I said, no, that's when you know you're alive.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a life wish.
It's a life wish, mm-hmm. Because it's like, you do these things and then you realize this is living. How precious life is. So, just doing the same thing day after day after day, that's a death wish to me.
So you got yourself to California, practiced law there. Mm-hmm. Well, how did you finally get to Hawaii?
So I'm practicing law in Santa Cruz, and I have a friend, she's an artist, and she lived part-time on Maui, she and her husband, and in Hana. And they'd bought a fixer-upper, and they were fixing it up. My father had passed. I was having a hard time, and so they said, come visit us, and you can stay in Hana, for as long as you need. So I just went, and I fell in love with it. So I actually had that feeling again, I'm going to die behind my desk. Life's too short. Death seems to make me move. So when someone passes, I bought a house in Hana. And
how long were you there before you made that decision? You said, oh, yeah, I've got to do this. Was it 5 minutes or was it 5 weeks?
It was probably a day or two. And so before I left, I was there 2 weeks and I bought a house. And
gosh.
And I didn't buy the house contingent upon the sale of my house in Santa Cruz because I was afraid I would get back to Santa Cruz and get cold feet because there's so much involved with the law practice. And
what year was that?
2000. Yeah. And then I did sell my house and I closed my law practice, but kept a piece of it that I could do back and forth. So I did a back and forth thing for
So you still had a little bit of income coming in.
Yeah, I still had quite a practice. I just was doing it from Hana, showing up to Santa Cruz when I needed to, and I somehow compressed it so that I could go every 2 months, and then just stayed with friends or found a place to stay. And back to not being an activist. I always was for social justice issues. So, I always, in my law practice, I represent a lot of women who were victims of domestic violence. I helped draft some model plans for self-help legal centers. I worked at Legal Aid in Indiana. I taught law school, in community, not law school, but legal writing courses in community schools so that people could become paralegals. We volunteered in soup kitchens and various kinds of things like that, and taught my sons to treat women as equal people and all people as equal people.
So you weren't politically active necessarily, but you were active in other ways.
Yes.
For like you said, human rights.
Yes.
And that
human
kind of
rights
thing.
has always been my thing. Yeah.
On Maui, do you feel like here in Seattle, we're in a little bit of a bubble in terms of the liberal situation? Is that the same as Maui?
Yes, very much so. We're a blue state, and then in Hana, even though we have many different religions, and there's also probably Republicans, but no one talks about it, and everyone is just accepting. And
you're too busy looking at the sunrises and the sunsets and the palm trees,
and we all just live together. And so, I'm in a bubble for sure. And I really didn't have a good grasp on. I never in my wildest dreams thought the election could go the way it did.
But I was going to ask you that if that took you by surprise.
Yeah.
And your friends, too, took you by surprise,
Yeah.
I'm not, I vote, and I have, for a very long time, and I'm also a person who doesn't normally let exterior events bother me too much, because I realize it's not because I don't care, but it's because I realize that my happiness depends on me. It doesn't depend on what's happening out in the world. But I was, I cried. I went to bed that night and I cried, and I got up the next morning, I cried, and it was because I felt like, how could all of these people, how could our country think that it's okay to have this person as our leader? And it's not okay. It absolutely is not okay. And I'm not talking about policy. I'm just talking about what he portrayed.
Decency,
yeah, exactly.
Decency.
And that really threw me as well. So it sounds like it was similar for you. But you did something about it. I didn't. I went to bed numb with tears in my eyes. I woke up the next morning numb, with tears in my eyes. And so tell the story of what happened to you. And again, I know that it's been pretty well documented, but it's great to hear it in your own words about how that kind of came to fruition on your Facebook.
Well, I
post.
went to bed later than you because I'm on Maui, so I'm 3 hours later, and so I definitely knew, and I was starting to already hear from people, and I was really upset. I was angry. I think all the rhetoric bothered me, but especially the rhetoric around women and the disgusting things that were said. I mean, just disgraceful, so ugly. And then about different religions and different cultures and different races. I mean, it is indecent. And I woke up I went to bed upset, and I woke up angry and thought, and the feeling was, this is not who we are. I don't believe it. This is not who we are as a people in this country. We do not stand for that. We do not stand for those values. And so about 3 days before that, a friend had put me in this chat group, and I had never been in it, but I thought and it's a political thing. I thought, well, I can at least go there and commiserate with people and see what people are saying. And so, it's women.
Was that the Pantsuit Nation?
Yes, it was Pantsuit Nation. And so I went on Pantsuit Nation, and, I'm sure there's many, many threads that are going, but I'm in a thread. And I just suddenly had this desire to march. Because, again, my response to when I'm feeling powerless is to do something. And so marching, to me, showing up in mass, women showing up in mass in huge numbers to show this administration, we aren't any of those things that you said we were. We have power, and we can make things happen. And that was overriding force for me. So I wanted to prove that administration wrong, and that look what we've accomplished. And so I started saying I thought we should march in the thread. And I was getting comments like, well, there's not enough time to plan it out. I wanted it to be the day after inauguration, to say, welcome to your first day of work. Here we are, and we're not going away, and hear our voice, and we're loud and proud, and, and people would say, well, we can never pull it off in that length of time. And people would say it's too cold in Washington, D.C., because I wanted it to be in D.C. the day after inauguration. And they said, all kinds of things, and, why it wasn't possible. We'll never get a permit. And I just kept saying over and over again in various ways that I could say it. We need to march. We need to show up. What about, just imagine the impact of 1 million women showing up in D.C. the day after inauguration to say no.
Why weren't you deterred by all the responses from people?
I don't
Because
know.
maybe they were right. Maybe, really, like I put myself back in that time, and if I had come up with that, if someone said, you can't get a permit in time, I would have thought, okay, you can't get a permit in time. Or if they said it was too cold, then I might say, well, okay, then we'll do it in June. But you weren't deterred.
I said, that's the time right then. You don't wait till later. We already know the things he said are not, it's like, will he get better? He won't. It won't get better because he's incapable. I mean, the speech already marked to what was going to happen. It wasn't going to get better. And too cold? Well, hello, we can just bundle up.
We can wear hats.
Yeah, someone came up with a plan for that one.
Yeah.
And then the planning of it, I don't know. I just trusted the universe on that one. And the permit, as a lawyer, I knew whether we had a permit or not, we could march. First Amendment allows us to march as long as we're moving. And so that's what I kept saying. We don't have to have a permit. They cannot stop us.
Oh, okay. See, that's something I wouldn't have known.
Yeah. So we want a permit. We needed a permit to rally, to have a rally place. And of course we wanted to rally, but we did not need a permit to march. And I kept saying these things. And so finally one woman said, I'm in. And I said, so then I am waiting for someone else who's social media savvy, because I'm not, to create an event. And I kept saying, well, we need an event. No one would do it. And I'm like, how do you create an event? And so people were kind of telling me. And so I jumped off the thread and I went to the Facebook and read the instructions, and okay, this is how I do an event. And then I would go back on and I'd say, public or private? And they would say private, because if you do it public, you'll get trolls. I didn't even know what a troll was at that time, but I know now.
Yeah.
But so I made it a private event, and I put in all these things I just said. The date, because Facebook, if you make an event, you have to fill in all that information. The date, the time, our route. So I went back on. What should the route be? What do you think our route should be? And
you had no idea.
and we're chatting about it, and I said, well, how about Dr. Martin Luther King's route? And someone said, yeah, that's great. And so I said, and so I put that route, then Google Maps out that route, and what else? Our purpose, which is basically what I was just telling you: stand up for women's rights. Women's rights are human rights, a fair, just, and inclusive America. And hear our voice. We're not going away. And I wanted it to be 1 million women, so I called it the 1 Million Women March, not knowing that had already been used, which we quickly changed. Anyway, so I made the page and marked it private, and marked the box that said friends could invite friends. So I went to bed with maybe 70 people coming. I invited some of these new people on the thread, and I invited some of my friends, and then I went to bed. And at first, I remember I said to one woman, "There's not very much response," and she said, "It's just been a little bit of time. Give it a little bit of time."
Give it 12 hours.
So yeah, I went to bed. I get up the next day, and over 20,000 people had hit and were either interested or coming. And Facebook had shut it down, actually, because they couldn't handle the number of invites, and people, my message box was full. My Facebook,
because you had made it private. You were having to
exactly. The only way anyone could get invited was to get an invitation from someone, either me or a friend,
to be approved.
So that was, and then the rest, and then I quickly brought on co-hosts to help me manage it, and then the co-hosts team were more connected and more, and they knew people, and they got some seasoned activists on board, and then we set up an organizer for every state, and then the rest is history.
That is really amazing. One of the things that is portrayed, and I think this is probably a little bit more early on, it's that here's this grandmother from Hana, who's like kind of accidentally stumbled into this big thing, and I don't think that there's any doubt that you've stumbled into it, that it was an organic thing, it was a great idea, but that you really pushed for it also. But I find it funny that you're portrayed as a grandmother, because when you kind of read that headline, it makes me think of somebody who's sitting, with their glasses, they're pushing up their glasses and they're knitting and they're looking out the window, and you're not that at all. Is there any part of you that just thinks like, why do you keep saying that? Why do you keep calling me the grandmother? You're a retired lawyer, is that right? So a retired attorney. But I think that we have this image of like, oh, the nice little grandmother from Hana, started this thing. But it's really a much more powerful story behind it than that. And I love the fact that it does go back, that you have this history of kind of going against the grain in your own family and your community and making decisions that were different, and it's not like suddenly you got this idea that you're going to make this big change. And I think that that's okay. I think people who are listening, I guess my point is that, look, we can all make a difference, right? But the portrayal is a little bit different than the grandmother who's sitting and doing her knitting and her crocheting and drinking a cup of tea. It's
I'm not your typical grandmother.
No, you're not. And that's awesome.
And I think there's a message to that. Well, I think a couple things. One, it's okay if they call me grandma, because I am, and I think it's non-threatening to some people, and that's why they do it. But also, I think it's good in another way, because it shoots the hell out of what a typical grandmother is. And so it shows women who are grandmothers, hey, you don't have to give up. You can still make a lot of things happen. And I think I've often been underestimated in my life, and that's okay. I'd rather be underestimated than overestimated. I know what I was capable of and what I've done in my life. And if people want to just think I'm just a grandma, well, they can. If they want to know more about me, then that's fine too. But the label isn't really, I'm not just a grandma. Yeah.
I'm not sure why there's something a little bit, let's see. I love the fact that does translate to other women who are grandmothers who may be emboldened and say, you know what, I can do something.
Right.
That's
positive.
Yes, that is definitely a positive. I just don't want to, I don't want to diminish what you've done and the fact that you have a history of being bold as well, because I think that's really important. Yeah,
I think the only part of it that bothered me was that, I did stumble in the sense that I'll admit I'm not an activist, and I wasn't socially a social media expert. It's not how I grew up using social media, and Facebook had been just my happy place for photos, and so I hadn't used it a lot. But I'm intelligent, and so I figured out in the moment how to make a Facebook event page. I didn't exactly know how to do it, but I did it.
You figured it out.
I figured it out. And so I think they wanted to portray that I kind of just accidentally stumbled upon how to, but no, I had, the intention was there. Just the technology was in the way.
Right. Yeah, but you figured it out. But
I figured it out.
Right.
And I didn't let it stop me.
Yep,
yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
I do have a question here that I want to ask kind of your opinion on. The statistic that I've read is that 53% of white women voted for this administration. How do you explain that?
I've been asked that question. I'm not sure. I think a couple things. I think one, they have some kind of latent misogynist tendencies that they're not aware of. That they live in a world, that they were raised in a world where men were smarter and more proficient at doing things, and that if they have the choice between picking, for instance, between a female doctor or a male doctor, they'd pick a male doctor.
Or pilot.
Is
another one, yeah.
Pilot. And it's something probably not even that they're aware of. And so that's why they voted that way. And then there's also a group of women who that's how their husband voted, so that's how they voted. The same kind of thing. Their husbands are that way, and they go with what their husband do. But how they could, I still cannot wrap my mind around how they can hear what was said about women and about just basic human values, about things we would not want our children to hear or believe, and sort of push that aside and vote for that person. That I cannot wrap my mind around.
No, I can't either.
Yeah.
I can't quite figure that out.
Yeah.
And these are good people.
Yeah.
There's on one-on-one, or I know that there's people in my community and my family.
And my family too.
Yeah. and they're not bad people. I just, I have a hard time with that.
I don't understand
as well. Yeah.
And I think I've heard that there's been some shifting of that they're starting to see, that some people who voted for this administration are starting to see they made a mistake.
I think the view was that was all campaign rhetoric.
Yeah.
And that things would change.
Yeah.
And they haven't changed.
Yeah.
They've gotten worse.
Yep.
Okay. Well, thank you for answering that. Before we started recording, we talked about some really interesting things. And specifically, we talked about your talk story programs that you're now putting together. Can you explain what that is and kind of where that came out of?
So it's a Hawaiian phrase. Talk story just means to get together to talk. So after the march, I wanted to do talk story, but one goal is people want to hear my story, just like they want to know the origin story and they want to know a little bit about me. But what I'm interested in, I hear from marchers almost on a daily basis with stories of inspiration about how the march changed their life and what they're doing differently now. And so I wanted to use the talk story as an opportunity for the marchers to tell me what they're doing differently now, to go back to the march and tell me how it affected them or impacted them, and then also to tell me what they're doing differently now, because I've personally hear these stories, but I want the world to hear these stories.
What kind of stories do you hear?
Well, an 8th grader, Eliana, her name is Eliana, and she lives in Chicago, and she found me through Women's March Hawaii, which I'm affiliated with, and she went with all her aunties and her mom and her grandmas. They drove to D.C. and marched, and she was so profoundly moved to have been a part of that. She'd never witnessed anything, I mean, like most of us. She'd never, but especially a child, an 8th grader, is impacted. She's at that age where she's really impacted by the peaceful solidarity and the love and standing up for what was right. And so she found me, she interviewed me, and she wants to do a documentary. And she has a mentor to help her with the documentary, and she wants to take it to different schools to show them what they can do to
She's
help.
She's 8th grader, did you say? Oh, my goodness.
And then I have a woman on Oahu. Her name is Desi, and she's the mother of 2 disabled children, and her mother passed recently, and she was feeling hopeless, and she said that march made her feel so empowered and so, I have to do this for my daughters. And she took her daughters, and she's now actively involved with grassroots organizations and helping. And that's making her feel powerful, and she's doing it for the healthcare on behalf of her children. There's Tom and Sandy, who are from New Mexico, and he used to be a park ranger in Maui, and they were going to come to Maui, so they figured out how to contact me, asked could they drive out, when they drove out to Hana, could they meet me for dinner? And then they told me about their experience and what they're doing in their community and what other people are doing in their community to make a difference, which phone call and letter writing, and someone's made tote bags, and they're selling them to give to various organizations. There's a woman here in Seattle. She made a sock. She's a fourth generation Japanese American. Her name is Leslie, and she is gay, and she had it wasn't that she hid that before, but she's now talking about that. And she made a sock called Rise Up after the march, and she did a profile on me, but the 10% of the proceeds are going to the organization. There's other stories.
Yeah. So these talk story events, and I know this from our previous conversations, you're looking to maybe have an event where you'll be speaking, but then it'll give other people the opportunity to tell their stories as well.
And what I started to say is that I'm inspired to hear those stories. I mean, this is why I did it, to help empower women, and not just women, women's allies too, whoever wants to rise up, to stand up, to feel empowered. And so I want those people to share their stories, to continue to stand up and tell their stories so that they still feel empowered, and that makes someone else feel empowered, and we keep the ripple effect going. So the talk story isn't just for me to, I know my story and I know people want to hear it, and I'm happy to tell it, but what I want is to hear their stories. Yeah.
Right. I think just like what this podcast is about, I think when we hear other people's stories, it inspires us.
Yeah.
We relate to it, and it makes things possible that we didn't think were possible before.
So when people share their stories with me in Hawaii, people say goosebumps, but in Hawaii we say chicken skin.
Yeah.
So I get chicken skin every time someone tells me how much it meant to them. It's changed my life.
Are you looking for locations around the country or around the world to host these kinds of things?
And we're still working out funding and traveling for me to come do that, but we hope that will happen soon. And I've got a Facebook page where I'm also asking people to share their stories, but it's not as impactful to do it, in person.
Are these events, are there opportunities for these events where you're not there, but to have a talk story that's just the local chapter maybe?
Sure. I hadn't thought about it, but that would, of course, be fine.
Just curious. And what we'll do, and I'll put this in the show notes, we'll add some links to how people can contact you or your team or their local chapter as well.
Yes.
And find out more about this if people want to host or tell their story or, get involved in some way. You said earlier, and I think this was when we were chatting, you said that you just don't take no for an answer. You don't, I think your words were, can't isn't in your lexicon. It's not in your vocabulary. Is that, where, do you know where that comes from?
I think if I give in to that kind of thinking, then it leads to me feeling depressed or hopeless. And so the only solution that's ever been for me, my upbringing wasn't the easiest. And so I think I developed some survival skills early on. And that was, just do it. You can do it. Just do it. Figure out, solve it, do something. And I'm also just happen to be a really good problem solver. I see solutions where maybe other people don't see. And not that I sit and think and ponder, just organically, it just happens, comes to me.
A lot of people may have thrown up their hands at something, though, if they ran into a difficult situation and said, oh, well, I can't do that. Like growing up, if there were issues there.
There's something in me that I'm the opposite, that I'm just going to try harder and I'm going to keep doing it. And I have fallen on my butt. I mean, I had owned houses. I was trying to buy and sell houses, and I got caught in the market. I lost everything, and I had to bring myself up from that again. And during that time, I was also losing my eyesight. And the doctor actually told me that I had a rare eye disease, and the doctor told me I would probably lose my eyesight in 6 weeks. And when
was this?
It was going on from 2003 until recently, till a year before the march. And progressively, my eyesight was getting worse and worse. So let me back up. I retired from law because my eyesight was getting so poor. So I didn't go blind, but it was getting poor. And I sat around for 2 years waiting to go blind. And then I thought, well, hey, I'm not blind. And I was kind of down.
Were the doctors wrong, or were you doing something
They weren't wrong. It's just what was happening was I refused to believe I was going to be blind. And so a lot of vision is memory. So if I could get a piece of information enough to trigger a memory, I could fill in the missing pieces. So it's just lucky I had a quick brain. And so I was just making myself like see from the memory. And so, but life was a struggle. So then I retired from law because really in a courtroom, you can't control the environment and you have to be able to, I was missing verbal cues. I would look at people, if people looked at me, they thought I could see, they didn't realize I couldn't see. And so I would just look where I knew the eyes would be, but really the face was a blur. And I would just maintain what I thought was eye contact, but I still was missing some social cues. And
Right.
in a courtroom, you can't do that. So I retired from law, but I had the teaching degree and I had always taught through my law career. So that's when I decided, and I had traveled overseas. So I decided to teach overseas because I thought I can control my classroom environment and set it up in a way that I memorize my students, and I can still teach. And if I do it overseas, it's not so much technology, so I didn't have to be on a computer as much.
Where did you teach?
So I've taught in Guatemala, in China, in Bali, in Saipan.
Wow.
And the most recent was Gabon.
This was after your kids were grown,
Yeah,
out of the house.
And this is after they told me I was going to go blind. Yeah. And so right before Gabon, I realized that, so I had pretty much given up driving everywhere but in Hana. And I realized that very soon I'm going to have to give up driving in Hana. And then that was like, I really was feeling despair about that. So I started researching stem cell treatments, and I found one that was a clinical trial in the US, and I did it, and it restored so much of my sight that I'm pretty much, I still have vision loss, and because it can't repair a lot of the damage, but it restored enough that I'm back to pretty normal. I can drive now. I can do things I couldn't do before.
Where was that?
In Florida, and it was no guarantee. It was clinical trials, no guarantee it was going to work.
Can you say the name of that? The
Stem Cell MD. And then I went off to teach in Gabon. And then I was going to go teach in Panama this past year, and I decided I was pretty exhausted from Gabon, and I decided not to. And then this March thing happened.
This little thing called a march.
Yeah.
The Women's March. Oh my gosh, I just want to go down the whole path of the health thing and the eyes and the stem cell, because I know that stem cells have been, and just a little bit of a tangent here, because I do think it's a really important topic, and also taking care of yourself and kind of taking the bull by the horns in terms of that, I think is so important for people to hear that, because what we hear in the news is that stem cells are illegal here. I mean, that's changing, but there's been so much backlash against the stem cell treatment. And I've got a friend who went to Delhi for stem cell treatment of Lyme disease. Mm-hmm. And she arrived in a wheelchair, and she left running through the airport trying to get to her flight. And she had lesions on her brain, and it was just terrible. Yeah. She was immobilized, and I think she was in her 20s at that time. So I know I've seen people walk that were paraplegic after mm-hmm. having stem cell treatment. Mm-hmm. So I know that there's value in that. So I'm so glad to hear that,
yeah.
that you figured out a way to take care of yourself. And hopefully that's going to become more common.
Yes, I hope so too. And one of the reasons they're doing the clinical trial here is I think they want to prove that it works so they can get insurance to cover it. So here in the U.S., the only way you can do it is if you're getting your own stem cells. So they took stem cells out of my bone marrow. I would have gone overseas. I just couldn't find a place that had done eyes, that I could get someone else to say, yes, I know someone who's been there. But I'd do it again. And I walked out, and back to the way I am. I walked out of that doctor's office the day he told me that I'd be blind in 6 weeks, and I said, I'm going to prove you wrong.
Good for you. Have you been back to that doctor?
No.
Yeah, sometimes you can't go back. I know, but good for you. And I also find it really fascinating because I've been hearing these studies, and I think they say it about the Native Americans who were here, that they didn't see the ships coming, like the early ships, because they didn't know what they were. So there was no recognition. So that goes
exactly
to that memory.
That memory thing.
And I just was listening to another podcast recently where they talked about that exact same thing, where people can't see something if they've never seen it before.
Right.
They don't have that memory.
They don't have a picture of it in their brain.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's fascinating to me.
The opposite thing that happened was, like, if I couldn't hear, if I was somewhere, so I was relying on my ears way more than I realized. And so then suddenly, if I couldn't hear where I was, then I couldn't see, because they're so tied in. We don't realize how much they're tied in together.
You've been through a lot. It's completely fascinating. Have you, as a public figure now, have you received threats, or do you see any of that, or has it all been positive?
It's been positive. There's been a little bit of negativity. There's been, unfortunately, because I grew up in a conservative town, and I had friended all my old classmates. Some of them have made comments.
You've probably figured out, you weren't technology savvy, but you've probably figured out how to unfollow and unfriend people.
I have. And here's the thing. I for the longest time, I thought, I'm just going to let them stay on. But when they finally got a little bit over the line, I thought, why do I need to do that?
No, you
I don't need them in my life.
No, you don't need to be exposed to it.
So
good. So just a little bit of backlash, but
a little bit.
Not a whole lot.
Not a whole lot. Mostly positive.
I have questions that came in to me via Facebook, by my own social media, that I want to ask. But first, I do want to ask you, just logistically, how do you juggle everything? Because you've been thrust into the spotlight in the last year plus, and you not even the last year. Gosh, I wish the time was flying.
Yeah,
it's
even
like
6
the last
months
6 months.
6
oh
months
my goodness.
in July.
Yeah, it seems like forever.
It does. It does.
So the last 6 months or so, how have you been able to juggle that? Just family and life, and you must get so many emails and so many inquiries from people. How do you handle all that?
I take time to swim. When I'm on Maui, I take time to swim and walk. I walk every day. I do yoga. I make time for that. And I make time to be with my friends, watch the sunset. Sometimes I feel a little, whoa, whose life is this? And I do plan soon to take a trip somewhere and just for me, just to do nothing and not talk about the march. And I don't know where or when yet, but yeah, I want to.
We all want to go to Hawaii. Where do you want to go?
I want to go.
Switzerland.
No, somewhere warm.
Okay.
I don't want to be cold.
Okay.
So maybe India, maybe Bali. I've been to Bali. I might go back there, but really, I think I want to go somewhere where I don't know anyone. If I go back to Bali, I know people. So, I don't know yet, but somewhere where I can I want to get massage and eat really good food that's prepared for me, and
that sounds lovely.
Yeah.
You must have some bit of a background just in terms of, I'm assuming in your practice, in your law practice, you probably had people working with you and for you that were helping you organize. Mm-hmm. Did that help translate over into creating, it's a nonprofit now, is that correct?
Yes.
The Women's March is a nonprofit.
Yes.
So has that helped you kind of get organized? And again, I'm going from personal experience that I don't have a business background. Mm-hmm. I'm very scrappy when it comes to that. I just I figure out what I like to do, and then I float it out there to people and see if they want to come along on the ride with me in terms of my tours. But I don't have a business background. But did your business background and your work as a lawyer kind of help you get organized in terms of the march?
I think it helps me with people and how to be on a team and how to manage. But really, the infrastructure for Women's March Hawaii was already set up, because what we did when we were setting up the march is we designated, someone took the job to be an organizer for every state. So Women's March Hawaii was already an ongoing organization by the time, because I'm more pulled away from Hawaii and busy with the national scene. And then I come back home and I'm with Women's March Hawaii because, I mean, that's where I live and they're my people, you know. So they pretty much had it going. And they really have the reins of the nonprofit, and I'm with them.
How have you found people in each of the states to kind of lead up that effort?
Fantastic. I mean, the people in every state. Evie Harmon. So I just want to mention Evie Harmon. She was a yoga teacher. She was one of the original co-hosts that came on board on day one that I grabbed to help me, and she said, I'm only teaching one yoga class. I could probably give you 20 hours a week. And she worked night and day. And she is the one who set up every single state Facebook page and got every state organizer. And then all those state organizers had two jobs. One was to organize women and their allies to come to the DC March or to organize a sister march in their own states. And so those things are ongoing and they're going.
So it sounds like it came up. It came about organically. It wasn't like, okay, we need to vet people and figure out who has the time and the energy to start this up. Those people just came out, and the person who had the most time and the most energy kind of rose to the top and started it. Okay.
There was no time to vet and, you know, to interview, and there was no time. So it was who wants it. And then it was incredible. I mean, the people who volunteered their time to make it happen, you know, nobody was paid. And those people, all those people who marched and all those people who organized. And then, of course, there was the professional national team, Bob Bland, Tamika Mallory, Carmen Perez, and Linda Salzauer. They also brought on this very professional team on the national level that got all that infrastructure that made it happen. I mean, we had a logistics person, we had a PR person, they really knew what they were doing, and they got that going. And then everybody on the state level got their end going, and then it happened. But what I wanted to say is that all those people out there, they're the heart and soul. They're the ones who, without them, we needed every piece to make it happen. But those organizations are still existing, and then they're existing in different ways. Some are still with Women's March Washington, and they have the brand because it's an actual brand now, and they're creating their nonprofits. And some of them have veered and maybe gone with Indivisible, but we're all still doing this same work.
So when I saw you speak on Molokai, there was a gentleman who asked a question at that event. I want to ask it on behalf of the listeners because I thought it was a really important question. And what he said was, how do I respond to women who voted for him? And I know personally that there are people that I know, I'm certain of it. There's people in my community. And as I said earlier, there's people who I'm sure are just really quite lovely people. How do you respond when you know, or I don't know how to act around people.
I don't.
You don't either.
I don't either.
You don't know what the answer is.
Because my son has the ability to engage in conversation with those people and have a dialogue. And I just get angry. So, I mean, I don't get angry. I mean, I withhold my anger, but it makes me angry.
What does your son do?
He just, I don't know.
Well, no way. I mean, what does he do professionally?
He's the food and beverage manager of the Maidenbauer Convention Center.
Okay, in Bellevue here. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. I didn't know if he had some sort of a position where it kind of forced him to get along with everybody.
It's just his nature.
It's his nature.
It's his nature. And
which goes back to sometimes people just pop out that way.
Yeah, he popped out that way.
Yeah.
But upsets me. It upsets me because, again, the decency thing and the moral, the moral base. What are our values? And I can't formulate a discussion because And so I can't explain it.
Well, I would imagine that you're not surrounded by that many people.
I'm not.
Who disagree just because of the nature of who you are now and what you've come to represent.
Right,
okay, that's fair enough. We had some questions. I put it out there on Facebook, so I had some questions from people, and some of these we may have touched upon a little bit, but I do want to just give honor to those folks who were curious. Irene wanted to know just what inspired you to start the march, and I know we covered that a little bit, but maybe if you could just encapsulate that, what inspired you?
I think my granddaughters, and I thought, being a woman, a lawyer, when I got out of law school, it was 90% men, and so I really practiced law in a misogynistic environment and had to prove myself over and over again as a woman lawyer. And I thought, been there, done that. I thought we were done with that. I thought the misogynistic attitudes were a thing of the past. And so the rhetoric of that campaign really, really offended me personally because I lived it. So for my granddaughters, I didn't want them to have to be in a world like that, or in a world of bigotry and hatred and hate speech. And so those were my primary motivators, to prove to the world, to the America and the world, that this is not who America is.
How old are your granddaughters?
10, 8, and 4 and 4.
Twins.
Yeah.
Oh.
No, different.
Oh, different. Yeah, different dads. Yeah. Okay. Neat. Oh, good for you. That's a huge motivator, and I think a really important factor in terms of that, and just when I think about a lot of the women that I know, maybe middle age, maybe a little bit older, and they don't have a purpose, or they're feeling a little bit lost, if they can latch onto something that makes sense to them, to make a change or to be driven by something, then it motivates them, and it motivates me. I shouldn't even say them, but when I figure out a higher purpose that motivates me to get off my butt and do something, that's really important. And it sounds like that family is a huge thing, and seeing a better future for your granddaughters was a really great motivator for you.
And other people's children, for all the children.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So Lisa wants to know how you plan to translate this energy, all this great stuff that's been going on, into action. And then Anne wanted to know what your plans are moving forward.
The talk story. I really want to get the talk story going, where the marchers can, because we have so many people who marched and who tell me it changed their lives, and I've only talked to such a small percent of those people, and so that's important to me to document those stories, and so that they're archived historically. And that's one reason. And then the other reason is that it will empower more people to get busy and do something.
Have you thought about a documentary about the talk story?
Yes. So in a perfect world, what I would really like is to be able to and I'd like to do this not just in the U.S., but in the world, because we had over 5 million people, in the world. I would like to do it globally. And I would like someone to come with me and document the whole thing and have it be a documentary. That's what I want in a perfect world. That would be to tell the story of the marchers.
Well, let's put that energy out there.
Okay, let's do it.
I think it's great. I think that if there is a company out there, and what comes to mind for me is like a Hawaiian Airlines, because you are, you're such a great icon, for the Hawaiian people, just such a great thing. Hawaiian Airlines or Alaska Airlines or some airline that would come on board as a sponsor to help get you around the world. Yep. And help support in terms of that sponsorship. I can totally see that happening. I think that would be a great thing. Lauren wanted to know how we push forward and remain a force to be reckoned with. So I think that's a pretty powerful thought there. The talk story is one thing, but then is there a plan to kind of mobilize and get, have a reunion, have another big event like that?
I imagine that we'll do one every year. There's desire to have a march every year, an anniversary march. I'm not sure at this point. I can't speak definitely about that. But you can see that there have been other marches, the climate march, the March for Truth. So those are going to continue. Join them. Again, pick what it is you feel passionate about and follow that all the way through with whatever organization you want to. And it doesn't have to be Women's March. We're all in it. One of the wonderful things that came about was all these grassroots organizations that have sprung up, and we're all working towards the same end. So just get on board with one of them that you feel passionate about and work with them. Call, write letters, show up at town halls.
Well, I, for one, think that there should be another march. And I promise not to be on the top of Mount Kilimanjaro for that one. That would be great if there was an annual one. Diane, and again, I think this is one of those questions where we probably covered some of this, but I'd like to hear kind of an encapsulated answer, because you answered differently in terms of it being the purpose of it, or having your being driven by your granddaughters, the desire to have a better life for your granddaughters. So Diane wanted to know what the purpose of the march was. Can you kind of encapsulate that? And again, I know we talked about that, but maybe in a few sentences.
To show the power of women. So, and the power of love and solidarity, because I think it's really important to notice that the day before there had been arrests and there had been violence, and people were afraid there was going to be arrests and violence on the day of of our march. Mm-hmm. And I never thought there would be. I don't know why but I didn't. Anyway, it's pretty amazing when you think about the sheer numbers of people that stood up, that there was not one single altercation, there was not one act of violence, and there was no arrests anywhere in the world. So to show that's the purpose, to show it's possible. What is possible? The best in humanity stood up that day. So that is the best in humanity. That is what we're capable of. And that's why we came together. And sometimes social media isn't enough. You need boots on the ground, skin in the game.
Do you know how many countries participated?
Every continent. I'm not sure. Over 370 countries. Maybe
370 locations. Maybe.
Locations.
Yeah.
Locations.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Not countries.
Yeah. I knew what you meant.
Okay.
Yeah. So early on, there was a little bit of backlash from. Marianne had a question specifically, so I'll talk about that. She said there was backlash from the queer, the trans folks, and the people of color. Because they didn't feel like they were included. There wasn't enough inclusivity in terms of the march. I know that your website has a lot of information about this, but can you just address that in some words right now?
Yes. It was just because of the organic nature that it sprung up. I'm a white woman. I am what I am, and I'm the one who started it. And then I grabbed, and because of it being a private event, the only way I could get help once it went viral was to make co-hosts. So my inbox is full, and I just grab some people to help me be co-hosts so that we can start managing all the messages. And I never even looked at pictures. In fact, most people had the Statue of Liberty crying or Hillary Clinton.
Right. A lot of people had changed their profile photos.
Pictures.
Yeah.
So I didn't even know the color of their skin. I just picked 4 women who I thought could help, and I didn't ask about their background
or their ethnicity.
I didn't, or ethnicity. So, and then within 2 weeks, maybe a week and a half, we were addressing it from the get-go, but we actually got women of color on board and solving the name problem, solving all those things. But people were on day 2 were saying it needs to happen. Well, it was happening, but it took a little time.
Yeah, it didn't happen in the first 5 minutes.
No, it didn't happen in the
you
first 5 minutes.
You were sleeping.
I was still reeling.
Yeah.
I was still saying, what? Oh my God.
Yeah, exactly. A different Marianne asked, when can we do it again? And what's going to replace the pussy hats in the warm weather? No, you weren't part of the hats, were you? Was that somebody else who kind of took the lead
But they
on
did
that?
it for the march.
They did it for the march, but someone else's idea.
Yeah, someone else's idea. It was a great idea. We have on Hawaii, because it's warm, someone created a little headband with ears.
Oh, okay, because you don't want to wear it in
We
the
don't
heat.
want to wear the
Okay, so
heat.
maybe that's what it is.
Yeah.
That problem is already solved.
So it's out there.
Okay.
And what was the other part of the question?
When can we do it again?
Well, I hope we're going to do it annually.
Yeah.
Again, I don't know.
Do you feel like that's kind of out of your control?
I
or
do.
Is that something?
Because I feel like, so Women's March is a organization now and a brand, and they've got their team. And it's not that I'm not on the team, but I'm 6 hours behind them in time. I can't be working daily with them, so I'm
You're the
aware.
face and the spokesperson,
Yes.
and
I'm
they're managing it.
Yeah, I'm the founder, but I'm not involved in the day-to-day operations with them. I'm involved with Women's March Hawaii.
One other thing that I'll just say is that there were a lot of people who just wanted to say thank you for your work. My husband was included in that. He couldn't wait. We're recording at my home office, and he couldn't wait to meet you and just thank you in person. But there were a lot of people who just who sent me a note and just wanted to thank you for what you did. And it's just amazing. And I feel just like so heart-warmed and full today, just having met you and gotten to know you, better. Just, I think what you're doing is fantastic. And just crazy to think that it was an organic thing, a strong woman with an idea, and it's grown into something really big. So it's unfortunate that we need it, but I think it's important. I think it's not a bad thing, what's grown out of it.
Actually, I take that, because if the election had gone the other way, this wouldn't have happened. And honestly, I say that to myself, because I'd become a little apathetic. I wasn't politically involved, and I thought, not my job. And then I really woke up. And I think now a lot of us realize it is our job to make sure we are, this country is what we want it to be. Mm-hmm. We have to have a stake in that. And so it's not a bad thing. It's not a comfortable thing necessarily. It's not pleasant what's going on right now. But I think the outcome is going to be that we're in a better place and a better country and a better people. I think it's an evolutionary process that's happening right now.
So as we wrap up here, I have one more question for you. Given that this is the Be Bold podcast, and it doesn't have to be around the Women's March or women's rights, what do you think that a woman can do to just be more bold in her life? Well-behaved women seldom make history, which is the button you're wearing. Yeah, that's great. Yep.
This was given to me just recently, and by a woman who's she worked with Eleanor Roosevelt.
Oh my goodness.
And she said she only gives it to special people.
Yeah.
And so this is what I believe.
So well-behaved women seldom make history. So don't behave.
Don't behave. Yeah. Don't follow the norm. Even though I'm a lawyer, I'm a scofflaw, and I go around it's not necessarily that I break the law, but I don't always follow the rules. If there's not a path, just find one. Make a path. And that's how you get to where you want to go. And my life has been a zigzag.
Finding your own path.
Yeah.
I love that. Where can people find you?
I'm Teresa Shook on Facebook page, and that's my public page.
And we can like that there and,
yes.
and follow what you're doing.
Yes, and also you can contact Women's March Hawaii, and they have both a Facebook page and a website. And I think the Facebook page is Women's March Hawaii. I'll provide the exact link.
I'll find that, and I'll put that in the show notes.
Okay.
And then there's the Women's March, just the big general.
And then the big general Women's March.
Okay, great. Are you on any other social media, on Twitter or
I'm
Instagram?
Not on Twitter.
Okay, good.
I'm going to maybe learn Twitter, but I haven't yet.
No, I'm shaking my head no.
Okay.
I'm off Twitter myself. My last post was, I don't know, a year or two ago where I said, I'm off Twitter. Find me on Instagram and Facebook.
Okay.
So, okay, great. Well, I'll add all that information in the show notes so people can find you. And thank you again so much for coming out here and spending time with me. It's just Fantastic. And I'm going to come see you on Hana.
I just want to, and I just want to say to the marchers that, they thank me, but I thank them, because without them showing up and hanging in and standing up and, really, committing and following through, it would have never happened. And look what we did. I mean, it's historical.
It is collective. It's a collective.
It's a collective thing.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for starting it. At least. Yeah. Thanks.
Right.
Wasn't there just so much inspiration packed into that? Well beyond the Women's March, she's demonstrated that she is a force to be reckoned with, and that she's just not going to take no for an answer. And I loved that about her. A reminder that if you like what you hear, please subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play, and write a review. Those reviews really do help the podcast get more exposure and will ultimately help us grow our Be Bold community. I bet you know a few people in your world that would really also enjoy today's conversation and this podcast in general, so please do share. You can find out more about me by visiting Wanderlust and Lipstick, as well as Wander Tours, where you'll see the tours I lead around the world, as well as our culinary tours in Santa Fe, New Orleans, and here in Seattle. I encourage you to also check out the Wander World Foundation, the nonprofit I founded to help women and children in developing countries. I'll put links to all those sites in the show notes, as well as things that Teresa and I talked about. And you can find those on wanderlustandlipstick.com/podcast. Sign up for my newsletter on the Wanderlust and Lipstick site, and you'll receive a free download on how to get more out of your travels. You can friend me on Facebook, and I'm WanderGal on Instagram. If you know of any high-performing, adventurous, philanthropic women whom you think might be a good guest, shoot me a note or leave a comment. And finally, the ladies can join us on our Be Bold Facebook group. That's where you'll find our growing community. It's where we share goals, talk about our setbacks, and where you can find words of encouragement and inspiration from others. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Be Bold podcast. Until next time, be bold.